Albright. Welcome to the Digital Engineering 24/7 podcast. I'm here today with Rod Mock, president of TotalCAE. We'll be talking about HPC resources for engineering. As we know, HPC has grown in importance as folks are doing more complex analysis and simulation and design. TotalCAE offers both on-premises and cloud-based HPC resources. Rod, can you talk to us a little bit about why the clients you work with would choose cloud versus on-premise for HPC? And because cloud gets so much attention, is cloud inevitable in this space for these applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, because we do both on premises and cloud. This is a very common question that we get. Typically, what the cloud offers is the flexibility to be able to use a large amount of compute power, without having to commit that for long term. So, if you have a type of application, typically like CFD applications that have licensing that allows you to use unlimited CPUs, so you're not license bound, then the cloud can be great for that. Now the reason, and that is probably the most common reason why many of our customers are using cloud computing is because they want to access more resources for jobs that maybe need to get back quickly that they don't want to queue, or they're just beyond their capability of their current machine. Maybe they typically have 200 cores on-prem, but they need to run a couple thousand for a CFD app, from time to time. Now the reason people don't use cloud for everything, it's not necessarily inevitable because that agility does come at a price premium. Though typically today the cost of some cloud computing, is typically 2 to 3x the cost of having that same compute power on-prem. So you do need to be able to utilize that power more than 30% of the time. But for people that have day-to-day work, it is still dramatically cheaper for most of the time to be on-prem if you have a data center. So that doesn't. Many clients have eliminated data centers, in which case you could go cloud only. But yeah, the main usage of the cloud is that real flexibility and agility of being able to access compute power on demand without having to own it for a long period of time.
What then, is that the most common barrier for cloud adoption? And is it cost, or are there other things that might keep people from moving in that direction?
Yeah, in our space, I would say the cost is definitely a barrier because folks are kind of surprised sometimes that a computer that only costs $300 a month might cost you over $1,000 on the cloud if you use it all the time, or even if you do reserved instances. But the secondary barrier is licensing. Many customers are not necessarily bound by compute power, because compute power is fairly affordable. You can get systems with hundreds of cores now these days, at a pretty low cost. But their C licensing, the vendor licensing, usually is licensed by core for many applications, or you might need a special kind of license to unlock more HPC cores. And those really haven't kept up with modern processors. So the pricing of their licensing is what restricts them more often than not. So if you can't access 2,000 cores with your application, you're really stuck on-prem anyway, unless you do some kind of on-demand licensing scheme, which some of the vendors do. But there's in the oligopoly we have today, there many times it isn't just purely pay by the hour for the licensing type. Then the third barrier is sometimes still download speeds. If you have an enterprise, you're going to have a proper connectivity into the big cloud vendors like AWS and Azure, and then download speeds are not really a problem. But for some of the mid-market, they're not affording those high-speed pipes into these cloud providers, and they're downloading over the internet. And if you have hundreds of gigs of simulation output, that can definitely be a barrier when you're trying to bring that back on-prem. Or you have to do other technologies like remote visualization, which is definitely beneficial but not perfect. And so we just those are like the top three barriers we see: price, licensing restrictions, and then download issues for the mid market.
What about security? People worried about how secure cloud resources are, and are there particular issues, maybe even specific to engineering, where people need to think about before they make the move to the cloud?
Yeah, the cloud can be as secure as on-prem for sure. And the biggest thing is just having it professionally managed. So if you are attempting to do a cloud system on your own, there is a lot of caveats. And even professionals, you'll read in the news about how, buckets have been left open, or, different kinds of cloud hacks happening. And often that it can be avoided by following best practices. But many engineers aren't going to have that time to follow all these security best practices, and so that's why we recommend maybe not a do-it-yourself approach. On-prem, often you can get away with these things because you're behind multiple firewalls. But even today, an on-prem system does have to have higher security than the old days, just because of the ransomware and many other types of attacks that are occurring. Now, cloud services aren't immune to security issues. We've seen major, even in this last year, major issues where an attacker was able to pivot into another customer's domain. This is on one of the major cloud vendors, which is these. And so the more cloud services you use, they're not always equally secured. So that particular cloud service was actually used by one of the major CAE vendors in their cloud implementation. And so the more cloud services you use, it does expose you to more potential. But for those are the kind of security issues you can't really control. You do have to rely on the cloud vendor to close those. But there has been other major cloud issue, other security issues, like Log4j, very, very big news this year that affected, all on-prem and took a long time to fix and clean up. There is something to be said for outsourcing some of that services. Like when you outsource to TotalCAE, we take care of the security of the HPC, but we also rely on the cloud vendor themselves to secure their underlying infrastructure. So it's like many of the security on the cloud is now more of a joint customer, service provider and cloud provider. Those three things have to work in conjunction to have good security. But we don't see often security anymore being the reason people don't go to the cloud. Even the government has their workloads in the cloud these days for ITAR and other such things. So it's become the least reasons we've seen to go to the cloud. Security isn't one of them these days.
What about a multi-cloud?
There was so a couple of the major cloud vendors have had outages this year, and so then that does bring up the case of should we have a multi-cloud? In 90% of the, I would say that multi-cloud is not strictly necessary, because if the cloud vendor is down, usually you can fail over to another region, or in some cases, it's only a matter of hours. By the time you'd fail over to a completely different cloud system, they'd be back up. So there is a lot of interest in, well, maybe I can arbitrage pricing between different cloud vendors. But invariably, if you look at for the CAE space, the pricing is very similar. There's only a few major cloud vendors. They all price their offerings very similarly to avoid this kind of thing. So if you want to use a particular cloud vendor because they have a feature you want, we support all the major cloud vendors. Many times the decision is, most customers have either decided on Azure or AWS, or perhaps they're using Google Cloud. But if you pick that vendor, you're going to pick your CAE tools to run in the same environment, just for the synergy of being able to use all your other cloud services along with the CAE. So we don't see multi-cloud in the CAE space often. But sometimes, if you have a cloud vendor you've chosen, they don't have proper resources for HPC, where you can stand up a SaaS service like we have in others, in a completely different cloud. It does work, but the vast majority of the people choose the cloud vendor that their IT enterprise has already picked.
Now, I know a lot of the software vendors, the CAE vendors in this space, are starting to offer their own cloud-based solutions. How does that sort of affect the decision-making process when people are looking at what to do about their HPC resources and evaluating some of these new cloud offerings?
Yeah, I mean, some of the Ansys, Altair, Dassault, almost Siemens, everybody has a cloud offering these days, and so those can be great solutions depending on your needs. Many, if not most, of our customers are running more than one app from a vendor, and so they often will choose us because we support 150 some different engineering apps, and then they don't have to have like 5 different clouds. They can easily string together workflows. But if you just run one app and you don't mind having it, where it's not under your domain's control in terms of data and all these types of things, then those cloud vendor solutions can be good point solutions. But I would say, it's still early days of the cloud, even for the CE vendors. And so, oftentimes they may have something that you have done that isn't supported. Maybe it's a third-party library. Maybe it's a compiler. Maybe they don't support the region that you have. There can be a lot of different reasons. We've seen folks that we've worked with, work that are doing still either cloud or on-prem systems in lieu of the vendor's solution. But as time goes on, I think they'll be able to handle more and more of especially small workloads. Like TotalCAE doesn't handle if you're run 1 or 2 jobs a year. That isn't the kind of customer we typically have for HPC, but a vendor cloud solution would be perfect for that kind of thing. Where you're not having to have a lot of needs in terms of your simulation, and and so many of those cloud solutions do work quite well depending on your requirements.
Okay. Yeah, somewhat related to that, but also kind of going back to when we were talking about barriers to cloud adoption. You mentioned the sort of per core licensing models and how people can run up against those, particularly when they're using cloud resources. Given the the evolution of kind of how people are using these tools, have we seen any shift in licensing models that can kind of reflect the new computing environment that we're in?
Yeah, I've seen a great, and we just love this. All the major CA vendors are now offering license as a service. So, kudos to the original, kind of original initiator of this is like Star CCM Plus had Power on Demand. That was an early offering long ago, and similarly now you can get that same kind of licensing as a service from many of the vendors, which we like because now you can run your HPC workloads wherever you want. You can run it on prem. You could run it on a cloud like TotalCAE. You could run on the vendor's cloud. You get more choices of where to run your workloads. And almost all the CA vendors are now offering such an offer. Now, it may not be pay by the hour. You may be buying like use it or lose it packs of compute. They're still licensed by core in many cases. But the freeing up the licensing being only available on an on-prem license server or hosted by a single vendor, we do really like this licensing as a service model that most of the vendors have associated with because it's been able to make our life easier, our clients' lives easier to be able to help them run their workloads wherever they want.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Rod.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for having me and enjoyed the talk today.
Me too. This is Brian Albright for the Digital Engineering 24/7 podcast. We've been talking to Rod Mock of TotalCAE, and thank you for listening.